Hey, Business 163, Personal Finance, and this is now lecture number 2 in Module 4. And as you can see from this title slide, in this particular video, we're going to look at how to determine your net worth, or more specifically, your financial net worth. So this is where we really start the process of measuring our financial health and where we are at. And so one of the things we do is we work with this concept of net worth. It's a very simple formula, doesn't require higher math, it's simply subtraction, which is if we count up all of our financial assets and then we subtract from that number all of our financial liabilities, we end up with our financial net worth. And this is a very important calculation to do not just once, but to continue to do periodically throughout our life to see where we're at and to measure where we've been versus where we're at now and where we seem to be going, to sort of know and realize and identify, are we moving in the right direction? Are we at where we think we would like to be at? Where do we stand, and where might there be areas we can stand to improve? So if this is the basic calculation, assets minus liabilities equals net worth, well, let's talk about that. What are financial assets? First of all, assets. Assets are money or investments that you can convert into money, into currency, that you can use to buy things. And so it essentially is something, anything that you can relatively quickly convert into currency that you can use to purchase the things you want and things you need. So this will include things like, obviously, money in bank accounts, money in stocks and bonds, mutual funds or ETFs, or other types of investment fund vehicles. It will also include money in retirement accounts, including those with your employer. And it will include the value of any businesses you own, any investment real estate, any kinds of assets that you could liquidate into currency to buy things that you want and need. Now, some questions might come up. Should you include, if you own a home, should you include your home as an asset in your financial worth, your financial asset calculation? And the answer is yes, you might choose to do that. Of course, that also means if you owe a mortgage, you would have to include the liability, the mortgage balance in your liabilities. However, one of the things that's pointed out when we ask these kinds of questions, I know in your textbook it demonstrates including your home and the mortgage as an asset and a liability, respectively. But if you really don't intend to ever liquidate your home to live off the proceeds, but really that's the residence you intend to live in for pretty much the bulk of your life, then it really may not make a lot of sense to put your home listed as an asset if you don't intend to liquidate it. So you can go either way, and of course, if you list your home as an asset, you have to include the mortgage as a liability. So just as long as you make that own personal decision one way or the other consistently, you should be fine. Now, another question, what about automobiles? Well, automobiles, that's an interesting one, because of course, if you own your automobile and you have a car loan, you would naturally include the value of the automobile as an asset and the current balance on the auto loan as a liability. But then the question becomes, what would you really realistically get for the car if you were to sell it today? And you realize, of course, the way that automobiles go and how quickly depreciation with automobiles catches up to the value, you have to be conscious of being very, very conservative and reasonable about what you really think you're going to get if you sold your car to, as we say, an objective third party on Craigslist or something like that, right? So it may be the car that you grew up with, and therefore it has an awful lot of sentimental value to you. But when you sell that car, sentimental value doesn't get you anything from a buyer, right? So you have to be very conservative about that. And then, of course, you see the last bullet point. You do not include your clothing, your stereo, your televisions, personal items that typically, if you had to liquidate and sell them to convert them into money, you would only get pennies on the dollar, if even that, right? And so typically we warn against including any kind of real personal property, even many types of jewelry, unless the jewelry clearly has pretty significant worth on the open market. All right, so you add all that stuff up, and let me show you what that looks like. And so you can see on this slide, you add up all your bank accounts, your checking, your savings, any other types of accounts you have, any investments, any retirement accounts, and you subtotal that. And then if you know the dollar amount of any pensions and or Social Security that you would be collecting once you retire, we typically recommend people sort of estimate a 20-year retirement period. So you would take that monthly amount and multiply that times 240, subtotal that, and you add up those two subtotals, and that's a good number for your total financial assets. Okay? So you can go through this video again and just carefully work through the balances and the concepts that we are asking you to consider in figuring out what to include and what not to include when you start adding up your financial assets. That's step one. Step two is you turn your attention to liabilities. Liabilities would be the current balance outstanding on any loans, any debts, which would include things like consumer credit cards, auto loans, student loans, any other kind of loans you have, as well as, quite frankly, any money that you borrowed from family or friends if they expect some sort of repayment. Now, you may say, well, yeah, I borrowed the money from my parents, but they really don't expect repayment. Well, that's what we call a gift. So if it's clearly a gift and everyone understands it's a gift, that's one thing. But if there is the hint that someone is really sort of expecting repayment at some time in the future, you should include it as a liability. And I realize you may not have necessarily all of the balances for these kinds of things ready at your fingertips, and that's why it takes a little work to find the most current statement or the most current bill and really total it up, right? And so once you get all that together, what you would get is something like this, right? All your credit cards. I'm not presuming anyone in this class only has 2 credit cards. You may have more than that. You may have less. I don't know. But you add up all your outstanding consumer debt, any other types of loans. Those are your total liabilities. And then, of course, what does that mean? Total assets, get that from that previous slide. And then total liabilities, which you just totaled up. Subtract the liabilities from the assets. That's your net worth. All right, that's the as difficult as the math gets, so to speak, in this particular video lecture. Now, here's the deal. I will tell you, whatever that number ends up to be, okay, if that's a positive number, but maybe a little lower than you were hoping, if that's a negative number, if that number is positive but significantly less than your annual income, right? I mean, whatever that number is, that's personal for you, all right? And while that may be encouraging to you, or it may be disappointing to you, or it may be a cause of alarm for you, all right? Whatever the situation is when you finally do this math and calculate that number, and now you're looking at this number, your net worth, right? I would encourage you, take it as a starting point. We're just starting this class. You realize in Module 4, this is the first time I've asked you to do some personal arithmetic about your financial condition. Take it as a starting point, not an ending point. This doesn't have to be where you end up. This is where you start with, and as we go through learning the concepts and the techniques and the tools in this class, you will be able to move forward, not where you're at today, but where you would like to be tomorrow and in the future. All right, so we have to start someplace though, and we start by calculating our net worth as the start point to figure where can we grow and get better as we move forward from day to day, week to week, month to month. All right, so here's our first element of figuring out what our financial health is, calculating our financial net worth. I encourage you to do this, to take your time, to do it slowly, to make sure you get all the numbers in there that you need to, including all your assets you want to count, as well as all your liabilities, right? And just as you calculate your net worth, keep that number in your head. Keep that number written down. Not asking for you to share that with the class or to share that with me. That's your own personal number, but that becomes your starting point as we finally, in this class, begin to look at our own individual, personal financial health and our current situation. All righty? So, we will see you in the next lecture.